Hello and welcome to Overwatch Database. My name is Connor and today we are bringing you a different video than what we've been doing. So since we haven't had time to get all these videos completed for every single team's preview before the season starts, we are just going to speed through the rest of the 16 teams that we did not get through before the season starts, starting with the Washington Justice.
Yeah, so to kind of reiterate what you said, we're going to do 8 teams today, and then tomorrow's episode will be the next 8 teams that we have not done yet. So like Connor said, we're going to start with the Justice today, and this roster is crazy. I think I'm actually higher on this roster than most people, which is saying a lot. A lot of people have this team like probably 4th or 5th is kind of where I've seen people put them in like their rankings. I think this team can be top 2, 3. I know that seems really high, but I mean, you look at this roster, starting with the tank line, Mag, not much needs to be said about him. He pounded for runaway contenders last year. He was amazing. I think he is a Rookie of the Year candidate. I know everybody's kind of looking at the DPS coming in for Rookie of the Year. I think this is probably the best bet for a main tank to win it. So he's amazing. And then the off tank is Fury. Fury has been around every single season, and he's probably the best off tank in the world. I don't know how much we really need to debate that anymore. I just don't see anybody that's better than him. Season 1 champion with the London Spitfire, played for the Fusion last season, and now going over to the Justice this year, and the dude is cracked. The third tank on this roster is Rhea. He is going to be the backup off tank for Fury. He was pretty good on the Hangzhou Spark last year. Nothing amazing, but I really like that they picked him up as a really solid backup. So overall, this tank line is really good. And, I don't have a lot of concerns about this tank line. I think that Mag is going to come in and just pound, and Fury is going to be same old Fury. He's going to be amazing. So this tank line is great. Looking at the DPS, I actually think this is probably the best DPS lineup in the league that no one's actually calling the best DPS lineup. Everybody's like, oh, the Shock have the best DPS lineup. Or, I think the Dallas Fuel have a really good one. There's a few other teams. I actually think this one could be the best. I really do. And I really haven't heard anybody else say that. But you look at this lineup, Tuba to start with. He was really good for the Justice last year, despite that team kind of sucking. He was fantastic. He plays a lot of, the Pharah, Genji, Tracer, Doomfist, Sombra. I mean, he is super flexible on what he can play. And then Decay needs no introduction. He was the carry for the Fuel last year while they were kind of sucking. And then he came to the Justice and they had him play Zarya during the playoffs last year. And everybody knows about that. They just kind of hard-pocketed him and he just carried them to wins. And he's amazing, but he'll be going back to DPS this year and he's fantastic. I think he might be the best DPS in the league. I know there's all this talk that Prophet is the GOAT of Overwatch League, but this guy could be when it's all said and done. Decay can play a lot of hit scan stuff. He's an amazing Ashe. He can play Widow, McCree, Genji, all that stuff. So again, a lot of flexibility there. And then Jerry is a guy people aren't really talking about. He was really good for the Uprising last year. Jerry was one of those people to me that I really looked forward to watching. I watched pretty much every match last season for all the teams every week, every stage. And I tuned into Uprising games to watch him because he kind of popped. He kind of popped off. And I don't think people are talking about him enough on this roster. I mean, you put him in with Tuba and Decay, that is cracked. That is such a good roster for DPS. And then you add onto that Assassin from Contenders. I mean, I don't know how people don't put this team up there with the Shock and these other teams for best DPS because it is just crazy. And maybe just people I saw doing rankings didn't, and most people are. I don't know. But as I said, Assassin coming from Runaway and Contenders is amazing. He looks really good. I think he could be a Rookie of the Year candidate as well. So just having 2 of those on this team already with maybe the best off-tank and best DPS in the world with Decay and Fury, respectively, I mean, that's just crazy. This roster is nuts. And then taking a look at the support line, I am not as down on the support line as most people are. I actually think Bebe and Closer is going to be pretty good. I know a lot of people that's the one thing holding them back from ranking them top 3. I don't think they're going to be as bad as everybody thinks. Like I talked about in the Fuel video with Fielder and Repel and those guys, I don't think they're going to hold the team back as much as people think. I think Closer was actually really good considering he was on that Dallas Fuel team last year. I mean, they were horrible. I think you put him on a better roster with better players around him. I think he pops off and looks good. I actually think he's going to look really good and surprise a lot of people. Bebe, I'm less sure about. But, you also got to look at that Hangzhou Spark team. They had a good roster, but they could never really put it together. And I think that was more on the coaching. So I think if the coaching is better on this team, I think he could improve a lot too and also surprise people. So I actually really think the support line is going to surprise people and be really solid. So now that we've kind of taken a look at this whole roster real quick, as far as putting them in a tier like we did with the previous teams, Connor, where are you kind of feeling for this team? I have a pretty good idea where I want to put them, but I'm kind of curious to hear your thoughts as well. Because I'm actually kind of inclined to put this team in S tier.
I mean, I can see why you want to put them in S tier, with Decay and Fury being so great and their two top contenders coming in for their DPS and tank as well on the other side of things. But I wouldn't put them S tier personally. I would put them A tier because their support line might not be as good as we think it is, or, as good as other people think it would be. So I think it would be A tier instead of S tier.
Right, I agree. I think their support line is where most people have an area of concern. I'm not real concerned about the rookies. I think Assassin will transition into Overwatch League very well. Same with Mag. So that part doesn't really concern me that much. Really, the only part that I have any hesitation on is the support line. But again, you look at Closer. He was on a really bad Dallas Field team. I think with better talent around him, I really think he will play better and look better. In fact, I don't even think he played that bad for the Fuel. I think he was just on a crap team. And I think same with Bebe, that Hangzhou Spark team had, I think, coaching issues, and I think that can kind of be something that can be fixed on this roster. I really want to put this team S tier. I mean, I know you're kind of leaning more towards A, but I really think this team is going to be just about as good as the other two teams that will be in S tier that we'll talk about later.
I think we should give them the benefit of the doubt and put them in S tier. Just because their supports might not be as great as we think doesn't mean the tanks and DPS that are already there can't carry them to a victory,
I absolutely agree with that, 100%. All right, Connor, so what's the second team we're going to talk about today?
I think we should do the London Spitfire next, given that is your favorite team.
That is my favorite team. I was actually going to lean into that and not say that at the very beginning, but that's okay. For all the people listening, yes, the Spitfire are my favorite team. I know the last 2 years have been a little rough. We don't really talk about that. I just like to look back at Season 1. So we'll look at this roster. And as a fan, I actually really like this roster. But in terms of what I think we can achieve this year, I'm kind of on it, honestly, overall. I actually think it has a lot of upside, and there's a lot of pieces here to build on for next year. Because, realistically, we're not trying to contend for a deep playoff run this year. We're just trying to see which of these pieces can succeed in the Overwatch League. But I actually am really excited about a few things on this team. First of all, the tank line. I actually think Hottie and Molfig are going to be pretty good. I think that pulling most of this team, because for people who don't know, most of this roster is the British Hurricane roster from Contenders last season, just put into the London Spitfire for Overwatch League. They just promoted that team, basically, except for, I think, 2 players. And they look really good. And I think the chemistry this team is going to have right off the bat, having pretty much played together in Contenders, is really going to help them succeed, especially early on. I expect London to have a good start to the season. And Hottie and Molfig in general, just playing together, I think is going to be really good, that chemistry to have. So Hottie plays main tank, Reinhardt, Orisa, Winston, and Molfig will be the off tank for the team. I think he'll probably play mostly D.Va or Sigma. And then in the DPS line, I actually think this DPS line is actually going really underrated. Hybrid, I'm also really looking forward to. He was really good for the Hurricane as well. Plays a lot of hit scan, Ashe, Widowmaker, Echo, stuff like that. He looked really solid. And then picking up Shaxx, I cannot over-exaggerate how good of a pickup that was. Shaxx was on the LA Valiant roster that got dropped in January. And picking him up, I think, was a fantastic move. That guy is really good. I don't think people actually talk about him enough, but he is really good on the, Widowmaker, McCree, Hanzo, Reaper, Tracer. He's got a big hero pool. And I think specifically having him, he'll probably be a Tracer. I don't want to say one trick, but I think he'll kind of specialize on the Tracer a lot. When we were actually talking about the Fuel preview, we were saying how they had a lot of metas covered. I actually forgot they don't have a Tracer player on that team. And I think you have to have a Tracer player right now. Tracer is super in meta, and I don't really see her not being in meta for most of this season. And that's a deficiency that this team won't have picking up Shaxx. So I absolutely love that signing. I think that really bolsters the team. And I think also Blase goes a little bit overlooked. I think he's actually really good. He was on a team last year that was kind of terrible, and they kept running him on heroes he wasn't really known for. They had him playing like McCree, and he's never really played McCree in the pro scene, and he looked awful because that's not what he plays. But man, when he plays Doomfist or Pharah or Genji or that stuff, I mean, the dude is really good. So I think that was a great signing as well. And then they also have Sharper, I think it is. And he will be actually coming up for this team, I think in June or July. And the reason it's not going to be till then is because he's actually only 17 right now. And that is when he turns 18 and he'll be eligible to play in the league. And he also looks really, really good. I've been watching Contenders this year, the newest season, and the British Hurricane games, and he's looked really good. So I think this DPS line is very good between Hybrid, Shax, Blase, and Sharpar when he's there. I think they're going to be really good and surprise a lot of people. And then for the supports, they got Ripa and Kelix. This is probably where the team gets held back a little bit. I don't want to say these guys are going to bring the team down, but I also don't think they're going to be big difference makers. I mean, Ripa was okay on the Hurricane. I think I probably am a little more excited about him. And then Kelix, I don't know. I don't think he's terrible. Don't get me wrong. He's serviceable. But I think compared to almost any other main support in the league, I think he's kind of towards the bottom. That's not to say the dude isn't good, but the talent in Overwatch League is so high that you can be a great player. You can be one of the best players in the world at your position and still be kind of bottom in the league. And I think that's kind of where he would sit in comparison to the rest of the league. So looking overall at this roster, my heart says put them in B tier because I really think they can be that good and surprise a lot of people and pull off some upsets this year. But my brain is telling me C tier, so I'll kind of let you be the tiebreaker there, Connor.
Everything you've said there, I really don't have any arguments against what you've said. I would have to go C tier along with you.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Like I said, as a fan, I want to put them higher. But if you're looking at reality, I think that's kind of where they're going to sit. I think they'll be better than a few of the teams in the North American region this year. I don't think it's going to be that many because everybody's just gotten so good this year. This is going to be the most competitive year we've ever seen top to bottom. Third team we're going to talk about in this video is going to be the Houston Outlaws, and I will let Connor talk about them a little bit as that is his favorite team.
Oh boy, throwing it back on me. So it seems like this year the Outlaws are all over the place. So you have Dante and Hydration who have been there for a couple years now. But then they lost Repel, they lost Jexay, they lost Linkser. They lost basically the good people from that team. But they did pick up Jangu from Contenders, they picked up Piggy from Contenders, they picked up Juby from Contenders. So they have 3 Contenders players there. And I know Jangu has actually been pretty good in Contenders. I'm not sure about Piggy or Juby. But Crimzo, he actually came over from the Dallas Fuel after a season to the Houston Outlaws after being in Contenders for about a year. So this team seems to be all over the place, but the things I'm liking about this team so far is, so Dante and Hydration have pretty good stats between them and a good character pool. So you have Dante with Sombra, Tracer, Echo, Genji, and Mei. So more of the specialist picks. And then you have Hydration, who plays Doomfist, Pharah, and Genji. But here's the good thing about Hydration. So even though he is strictly a DPS player for this team, he was also a tank player at one point, playing Wrecking Ball and Orisa. So with that in mind, it gives him a little bit of an advantage knowing more to those characters' counters and how to work around them. So if he happens to go against a team where they have a lot of, a Wrecking Ball or an Orisa, he can play around it more efficiently and get those counters in there. Now their other DPS is Happy, and he's more of the hit scan. He plays Widow, McCree, Soldier, and Hanzo. He does play Tracer. He's going to be leaning more towards the hit scan side of things. Now he had played for the Charge for 2 years, since around December 2018 until September of 2020. And then he came over to the Outlaws. So that's a really recent change, and I think that's going to be a really great pick for the Outlaws to have on their team. And now,
yeah, the dude is cracked.
Yeah,
he's
exactly.
Cracked.
Yeah. And now they do have a 4th DPS, and that's KSF. There's a lot of DPS on this team. Woo! Okay, so KSF came over from the Valiants, and the only reason he came over is because the entire roster was dropped. And he came over from the Valiant when they dropped their roster because of conflicting roster ideas. So I think an additional DPS from another Overwatch League team, not from Contenders, is again another great thing to have for this team. So next we have the tanks here. We have Jangu and Piggy, and they both came from Contenders. And from what I see here, they look fairly decent. You have Jangu who plays Orisa, Ryan, Winston, and Hammond. And you have Piggy who plays Zarya, Diva, and Sigma. So you got a mix of main and off tanks there, and some tanks that aren't really played in the league as much. However, I don't know much about these players because I'm not watching Contenders at all, really. Do you have any input on these players at all?
So, yeah, I mean, I don't know that much either. I know both of them, Piggy and Jangu, were like highly thought of coming out of contenders. Jangu on the main tank and Piggy on the off tank. But I really don't know that much. I have heard rumors, and I don't really like to put a lot of stock into scrims, like the preseason scrims between teams. I have heard that Jangu and Piggy have not been impressive. Like, I've heard they have not been very good. And again, that could just be total BS. I don't know, but that is the rumor kind of going around. But I do want to reiterate and kind of highlight a couple things you said about the DPS line. That is for sure the team's strongest aspect. And I think you hit it, right on the nail with KSF and Happy coming over from the Charge and the Valiant, respectively. I think both of them are super good. Happy is a cracked Widowmaker, and KSF was really impressive. He really impressed me last year. I never thought of him as a top-tier DPS until watching him on the Valiant last year. The dude was amazing.
Oh yeah, you wouldn't really think of that, And then they just come in like they replaced who? Linkster and Blase, right?
Yeah, and they are both upgrades too, in my opinion.
I mean, that's also kind of, why we put the other teams a little bit lower, the Titans and the Spitfire.
Right. Right.
And then for the supports, we have Juby, who came over from Contenders, and I don't know much about Contenders, again, but he plays Lucio, Mercy, and Bath. And those are probably the top 3 picks for supports in the current meta, at least, especially in Mercy and the BAP. So having those is going to be really good, but again, I don't know much about Juby. And then we have Crimzo, who came over from the Dallas Fuel. And as we mentioned before, the Fuel didn't seem to do too good, but I believe Crimzo is actually a really good player from that team who just happened to be on a bad team. So he plays a lot of Zen, Moira, BAP, and Ana. However, Moira doesn't seem to be played that much in the Overwatch League, so I don't know if we'll be seeing much of that. But his Ana was amazing. I do gotta say it was pretty amazing.
Yeah, his Ana play was really good. I don't remember if it was him. I remember one of the Ana players last year, just turned around and just shot a random sleep dart and slept like an invisible Sombra just randomly. I thought maybe
I do
that was
remember
him.
that. I do remember that. I don't know if that was him or not, actually. I do remember that, though.
His Ana's so good, it could have been him, though. It's kind of the point I'm trying to make. And yeah, so I think overall, looking at this team, their DPS is really good. That is definitely the strongest part of their team. I think a lot of people might say the supports is what this team hinges on. I don't think so. I think Juby and Crimzo are actually going to be pretty decent. I think Jangu and Piggy are really going to be what defines this team. Because as I said in scrims, apparently they have not been impressive. Hopefully that is not true. Because this team is kind of one of those teams that's going to be but they also have a huge upside. Like if Jangu and Piggy come in and just pound with that support line and that DPS line, this team could be like a top 10 team at its peak, actually. I really think that. I know a lot of people don't have them that high, but I think their ceiling is there if everything hits. If it doesn't hit, I don't think they'll be down in like the Paris, Vancouver, Valiant, part of the standings. I don't think they'll be that bad, but I don't think they'll be very far above that. So it's really a high-low team. They could go really high or they could go really low. Like this roster is just kind of all over. And it's somebody I do want to touch on real quick. The other kind of concern I have with this team, we didn't really talk about Jake. And he's a really interesting case because he played for the Houston Outlaws in season 1 and I believe season 2, and then he casted last year for the Overwatch League. Well, they signed him as a player coach. I believe he's the first player coach to ever be signed. And I kind of wonder how they're going to slot him in.
No, he's not. He is not the first player coach to be signed. The Fuel has 2 player coaches on their team. One what?
No, he's signed as a person. I'm not talking like a previous player who's now a coach.
Okay.
He's signed as a person who can play in the games and coach. He's signed as a coach and a player at the same time. Yeah,
that's weird.
It's really weird. I don't know how you really slot him in, and then you have all these other players, and if he's trying to coach them, how do those players respond to that? It's like, oh, well, you're just a player. You're not really a coach, so I'm not going to listen. I don't know how that dynamic will go. And on top of that, are they actually going to play him at all? He plays very niche heroes. Like, he was known for Junkrat. That's why, the nickname when he played it was Jake Rat. And so I don't know if they'll play him on that, like here and there once in a great while. That dynamic concerns me. But that would be the only thing other than the tank line.
I really don't think they're going to have a need for him to play DPS at all, since they do have 4 DPS on this team. So I really think they have that covered, and there's going to be no need for him to be as a player on this team.
I tend to agree with that. So, being this is your team, I'll let you decide what tier do you want to put this team in.
I mean, being my team, I would just want to put them in S, right? But in all honesty, I do think the DPS line is what's going to carry this team. However, with their tanks, I'm not sure how that's going to end up since they are from contenders and like you've said. So I would say A, but with those tanks in there, I'm going to bump them down to B, and I think I'll stick with that.
You would go as high as A with this team? Man, I was actually going to say like C with like a B ceiling.
Rip.
But
I mean, you see what I was talking about, though, right? You have
they have
those
huge
4 great
upside.
DPS. You have Crimzo coming over from the Fuel, great support, and then you have Juby who came over from contenders. So there's 3 contenders players though on that team. That's what's going to make or break it. But the DPS most likely can carry that along with Crimzo on the support there. So who knows how that's going to end up? But that's why I would say B.
Yeah, and I think all those arguments are valid. I just think that I don't think Piggy and Jengu are going to be that good. And on top of that, I don't know. I'm just kind of feeling C-ish. But see, that's the thing with this team. They are one of the only teams that have such a high ceiling and such a low floor that either one could be right. So yeah, I mean, we'll just go in the middle. I think B. I was kind of leaning towards C, but I think the middle is fine going with like a B. So next we're going to take a look at the Atlanta Reign. This is a team that I've never understood the hype going into like any season. Like it seems like every season everybody's like, oh man, the Reign are going to be so good, and they're not really that good. I've never really liked this roster. And okay, I'm just going to be honest with you all. I don't really hear people say this a lot, and I don't think a lot of people want to say this. Gator and Hawk kind of suck. They're not a very good tank line. Like I'm just going to say it. Like I really never hear people talk about them as like a weakness of the team because they never really lose you games, but they never really get you wins. And I think that's kind of a problem. I don't think they're that impressive. It's not that they're bad. They are not terrible tank players. But when you compare them to the rest of the league and how competitive it's getting and how everybody's gotten better, I mean, how many tank lines would you rank higher than this team? You'd rank them over the Valiant tank line. I mean, could you name 3 more? I don't think I can name 3 more. I'm a little biased, but again, I put the Spitfire tank line coming in over this team. Like, I don't like Gator and Hawk. You know, Gator's never really impressed me on the Orisa or Winston, Hog, Ball, like none of that stuff. Same thing with Hawk. Maybe his Sigma was all right, but yeah, overall, I think this tank line is really overrated. I just don't think they're that good. Looking at the DPS lineup, this is the saving grace of the team. It's pretty cracked. Edison, Pelican, and Kai is kind of nutty, to be honest with you. And this is what is going to get them wins. Edison was really good last year for this team. I think that he really proved himself to be a top DPS. He can play the Tracer in a Tracer meta. He can play Widow, McCree, Doomfist, Genji. He's super flexible. Pelican is coming from contenders. He looks really good. I'm really excited to see him play. Like, don't get me wrong, for all the, shit talking I did about the tank line, I think that the DPS are going to be really good. He'll bring like the Sombra presence to the team, probably like May if there's that meta, Echo, maybe Tracer. I'm not sure between him and Edison who you'd actually have play Tracer. I'm going to guess Edison just with Pelican being a rookie and all that. And then Kai coming over from the Valiant, he is kind of one of the most underrated DPS in the league, in my opinion. He was amazing on Hitscan last year for the Valiant. His Ashe and Widowmaker and McCree, and actually his Hanzo too, were all really, really, really good. I don't think he got talked about enough, honestly. So all in all, like, going down the board, unless Pelican just comes into the league and just booms, I think that they're going to be really good. And then looking at the support line, Iris and Masa, I don't really have any expectations for this. I don't think Masa's really that good. He was really good in Season 1. Don't get me wrong. He actually had a really nice rookie season and all, but the league has just gotten so much better. And I feel like, you talk about those players that kind of got left behind. We're never really able to heighten their game to kind of what it's becoming. I think Masa is one of those players. He's serviceable, but I don't think he's really improved. And I think he's going to really struggle with all the other support talent this year because we've never seen this much talent at the support position as we're going to see this year. It's going to be kind of crazy. So he will be the main support. And then their flex support will be Iris. I know his Zenyatta's pretty good. I don't really know about his BAP or anything else. And again, I don't think he's going to really be above middle of the pack at best. So their support line, I have a lot of concerns there. And I think having concerns, I have concerns with them and the tank line. I don't think the tank line is very good. I do think this team's going to win games. I don't think they're going to be like super bad, like bottom 3 or 5 or anything. I think the DPS lineup is too good for that, and they will win some games. But all in all, I'm not as high as a lot of people on this team. I know a lot of people were like, Atlanta Reign is a no-brainer top 10. I don't know about that. I've seen them put in some rankings as high as like eighth. If I was gonna be real, I would put this team in like the 12 to 15 range. I know that probably seems really low. I am not nearly as high on this team as most people. I just really don't think they're gonna be that good. Unless Gator and Hawk, their chemistry is just immensely better from last year. I don't see that happening. I don't think top eight is anywhere close where this team is gonna be, and I think they're gonna be disappointing once again. I guess before we move on to the next, team, I guess I should ask kind of what are your thoughts though, Connor?
Yeah, like going off of what you said, with their tank line most likely being really overrated. I mean, it could be overrated and good, or maybe just overhyped and bad. I mean, I think it's more of overhyped and average, I guess. Maybe the hype
Yeah, I
adds
think that's
onto it a
fair.
bit. Yeah.
Yeah.
Honestly, I would have to agree with you on mostly everything there. I think you hit pretty much everything perfectly about this team.
Yeah, with that said, I kind of wanted to put this team in C tier. We decided we're going to put them in B. I think that the DPS lineup is just too good. I would say that DPS trio has the potential to be top three in the league. I know that's really high, but I do. So I think they'll win some games because of that. So we're going to put them in the B tier. And then what's the next team we're going to be going over in this video, Connor?
Honestly, I think we should cover the Spark next just because their roster is so big and it would be quite a bit to cover. Just get it out of the way. I know there's not much you know about this team, so I wouldn't take it super in depth like we have the other teams. I mean, not as in depth because the other teams haven't been like super long, but just to get it out of the way, I think we should do Spark.
This team is weird because what do they have, like 12 players? That's absurd. That is too many. Okay, that is too many. I don't know why you have 12 players. Maybe it's 11. I don't know. It's still too many. Okay, double digits. That's too much. And what are you trying to do with this roster? Half of it is a Chinese roster. Half of it's a Korean roster. So what are you trying to do? Are you trying to do like half and half? Are you trying to split it? Three Chinese, three Korean players. Are you trying to do full Korean or full Chinese, or are you gonna have these maps we're going to do the Chinese roster. These maps we're going to do the Korean roster. Like, what are you doing with this team? I don't understand it. And I think that's a lot of people's issue with this team. On paper, there is a lot of talent there. I mean, on paper, that's a top 8 team. But how do you mesh that talent together? I don't understand. There's going to be a language barrier. I just don't get it. This roster is weird. I actually really like their coaching, but I kind of feel like they've bit off a little more than they can deal with here. Obviously, you're going to have Gouchwei start at main tank and Bernard off tank. Bernard's the only off tank, actually. Liege. I don't know if it's League or Liege. Coming in at main tank, I believe, out of contenders. He looks amazing. I think you kind of put him with Mag as kind of like rookie of the year potential for the tank position. He looks awesome. So their tank line is actually really good. I think the tank line is the only part of this roster that makes any kind of sense because League and Gouchwei are both Chinese players. And Bernard is Korean, but I don't think that'll be as big of a deal. But the DPS lineup, what do you do with it? You have Godsby, who's Korean, Architect, who's Korean, who they brought in last year to be like the guy and pop off every game and carry the team. And he wasn't really, I don't know if it wasn't really he was that good or it was the coaching. I think it was more the coaching. So they got to figure that out. They have Shai, who is Chinese, and then Somin Soo, who's Korean. I don't even understand the Somin Soo pickup. I mean, yeah, he was great 3 years ago. I don't think he's he's still good, but I don't think he's like carry potential anymore. So I just don't understand what you're going for with this DPS lineup. Like on paper, it looks amazing. And I don't know if I mentioned Shai already or not. He looks really good coming out of contender. I think he might be the best DPS on this roster, arguably. So there is immense talent here. I just don't know how you put it all together. Like who starts, who you're going to sub in and out, for what maps. Like there's just so much to figure out here. And again, I like the coaching staff. I just think there's too much to handle here. And then in support, I mean, this team has 4 supports. I don't even know if anybody else has 4 supports on their roster. IDK is pretty good. Coldest looks pretty good. I believe he's coming from contenders. Let me actually look at that. I don't actually know. Oh, he was actually on the Spark roster last year and then was on contenders before that. Okay. So yeah, I think he actually has a lot of potential. And then Mika is pretty good. I don't really know anything about MCD. I don't know if he's good or not. I don't believe he has any Overwatch League experience. He did play in the experimental card tournament, I guess. They just did a few weeks ago. But other than that, all his experience is contenders. So I don't really know anything about him. But yeah, this roster, I mean, I'm just going to say this about it. They could be like 15th in the league this year and totally suck. Or they could be like top 8. Like, they're kind of one of the only teams that are kind of like that. I kind of feel like with the Houston Outlaws is one of those teams. I mean, it's just all over the place. It's just such a weird roster. But if they figure out how to implement it all and, sub people in and out properly, there is an immense amount of potential here. What tier do we want to give this team, Connor?
Honestly, given the immensely huge roster and the split country team, I would put them lower. I would probably put them C, but with that huge roster and a huge pool of characters you can play with that, I would bump that up to B because you have a lot of talent in there that could be utilized. So I would start with C, but I would say B.
Will it be utilized properly?
I seriously think it could be. And if something's not working out, you have that huge roster to go off of anyways. So I think it will be. I think we should put them B.
Okay, yeah. I think that's perfectly fair. I think it's seen they could be A, they could be C. We just don't know what the hell it's going to end up being because it just looks like a mess on paper. And, one other thing I want to say before we move on is my biggest concern is you look at the roster they had the last 2 years on paper. They looked like they should have been top of the league, and they were pretty high in year 2 of the league. Last year, though, they really underperformed, I think, due to coaching. So it kind of makes you wonder, with 7 or 8 players on the roster, whatever they had last year, they could not figure it out. Are they really going to figure it out with 11 if they couldn't figure it out with 7? You know what I mean? That's kind of where I'm at. But we'll move on. I think you could do a lot of what ifs, about that team all day long if you really wanted to.
Honestly, there's a lot of what ifs you could too. Whew. Okay, that was team number 5. All right, 3 more to go. I think we should do Eternal next.
Yeah, that was the team I wanted to talk about next. They're gonna suck. I don't really know. I'm sorry if you're an Eternal fan listening to this. They're gonna be pretty bad. I don't really see a lot of good things happening for this team. I don't know. I mean, there's a little bit of potential. I don't think Elivo is actually very good. I certainly don't think he should be a starting off tank for a team. I think Dawn is kind of interesting coming from contenders. I've actually heard a lot of really good things. I don't know if it's Dan or Dawn. I've heard a lot of good things about him. I actually think he'll be pretty surprising for a main tank. I don't think he's going to be like Mag, Muse, League level, but I think he can be pretty good. The DPS line is very intriguing. I don't know if they're going to be... I know I'm supposed to be giving like a breakdown here, but I don't know. Like Suna might be good. Don't know. I know he's only played in contenders, so we don't know what he's going to be like at the Overwatch League level. And the same goes for Naga. And I think that's where my concerns with this roster really are, is there's just so much inexperience on the DPS lineup. Both of them will be rookies, and I think both of them have high upside. But I believe there will be an adjustment period. I don't think these are going to be guys that are going to come in and just pound right off the bat. And that's why I don't expect this team to be that good this year. I think next year they could have a really good roster depending on which of these pieces hit. But I think this year it's going to be kind of an adjustment, see what works out. And then they have Onigod. He plays a lot of hit scan, Widow, McCree, stuff like that. Ash. And he played for the Fuel last season. He's all right. I've never been like super high on him. I know some people think he's pretty good. So yeah, they don't get me wrong. They do have a lot of roles covered. They have, a Rush meta, they're covered. Tracer meta, they're covered. Widow meta, they're covered. So they do have a lot of flexibility. And I will say that's like the strongest part of this DPS lineup is the flexibility that they do have. I just think the inexperience is going to be a problem. And then their support line, Khan and Neptuno. I don't really know anything about Khan in contenders. I don't know how good he was. He will be the flex support for the team, and then Neptuno is the main support. Neptuno is kind of one of those players, again, I feel like kind of like Masa, that hasn't really brought his game up to the level that it's currently become with all the injection of talent we've had, especially this year. And don't get me wrong, I don't think he's a bad main support by any means. I think he'll be fine. Maybe even above league average, but I don't think it's going to make a big enough a difference on this roster overall. And I think this team is going to be pretty much bottom of the table. I don't really see a lot of upside. Again, I think it's kind of just seeing what pieces hit to build for the future.
Honestly, I don't have much to say about this team. Like you said, it would be an adjustment period. I have not read anything about this team, and I really have no input on it because of that. So I'm just gonna, I'm just gonna say that I agree with everything you've said. Honestly, because it made sense.
Yeah. I didn't want to put this team in D tier, though. I don't think they're going to be that bad, because I do think there's a lot of potential with some of these rookies. So I'd like to put this team in C tier. I do think they'll be better than a couple teams.
Okay, based on what you said, I think that would be, a good choice. Probably not as bad as the Valiant or the Titans. And, I say Valiant's going to be bad, because we talked about this before, and the entire roster drop. Titans, just because their entire setup in general. So we Paris having some, some experience in there, of course, and they have some potential. So I think.
Well, and I think the rookies will be good.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's just going to be a bit of an adjustment.
Right, yeah. And I would have to agree with that.
So the second to the last team we're going to look at is the Seoul Dynasty. I'm actually really excited about this team this year. Not going to lie, as a London fan, I kind of strongly disliked, we'll put it that way, the Seoul Dynasty in years past. Until they signed, half of the Spitfire team from season one, and then I, kind of, my allegiance kind of didn't go from Spitfire to the Dynasty, but I started rooting for them, being that they have profit and gesture and everything. This team is kind of, I don't know if they solved their problem last year, which was inconsistency. Like, they finished 11th, I believe, in the standings, and then they made a playoff run and got all the way to the grand finals before losing to the Shock. I mean, they are just so meta dependent. And I don't really feel like they really fixed any of those issues. Look, Gesture's my boy, but I'm just gonna say it, like, I think people have kind of still been overrating him. I'm not saying he's not really good. I know there's going to be an uproar. People like, well, you're not saying Gesture's good? Like, he's good. Don't get me wrong. His Winston's still good, but I don't think he's as good nearly as he used to be in the sense that the whole league has just gotten better. And there's so many players that have come into the league that are just so good. So I think that he started to struggle the more and more he's been in the league just because of the talent getting better. And I kind of worry about it. I don't think he's going to be bad, but I don't think he's going to be the same Gesture we've seen before either, if that makes sense. I think Marvel would be really good. And then I've heard good things about Tuyu. I believe he comes from Contenders, and I've heard that he looks really good, and people are really excited to see him play. So I am actually excited to see him play too. I believe he plays off-tank. So I assume they're going to have him play pretty much every off-tank, and Gesture will just be subbed in to play Winston. And I think that's the best thing you can do. I think if you just have Gesture focus on Winston, that's where he will succeed very well, and have Tuyu play everything else. The DPS lineup for this team is pretty good. I really like Fitz. I think he's really good. I wasn't really high on him until last year. I thought he had a really good season. He just has such a wide hero pool. He can play the hit scan, he can play Doomfist, he can play Sombra. He's just very, very flexible. And he's very good at all those heroes. And then Prophet, arguably the GOAT. People kind of refer to him as the GOAT. I think he's the greatest Overwatch player of all time. Not just Overwatch League, just Overwatch player ever. He's just so good on everything. We'll see him play a hero he's never played before in the Overwatch League, and he just pops off. I mean, he's incredible. My favorite moment of him was, the grand finals in Season 1 with that Tracer play on Volskaya Industries where he got like a 4K or whatever to help them win the championship. I mean, he's just, he is the GOAT. And he's like I said, he's just super flexible. He can play Pharah, Ashe, Hanzo, Genji, Tracer. I mean, he can probably pick up any DPS, I'm going to be honest, and play it well. And you could probably only say that about a few players in the entire league. And then I really like the Saebyeolbe pickup. I don't know how much he's going to play. In fact, I don't expect him to play hardly at all. But I think if you wanted to play him on Tracer, whenever Tracer is super meta, so you can have Prophet focus on everything else, I think that would be really good for him and a really good fit on this team. And I think even though he's not going to play in a lot of games, he brings a really good leadership aspect to this team that they need. And maybe that I think could be what helps with the consistency. Where I am most concerned about this team is the support line. Creative, I think, is a pretty good off-tank. I certainly think he's, above league average. I think he'll really shine on like Ana and Zen and stuff. Well, Zen won't really be played, I don't think. But I think he'll really shine on like Ana. He was pretty good for them last year. I don't really like the Anemo signing, though. I would have rather they just kept Toby at that point. I think Anemo is a downgrade. He's going to play main support for them. And I don't think he was that good on New York, actually. I think people like him a lot. And I don't think he's, below average or anything. But I think he's average. Like, that's it. Like, I don't think he's that good. I would have just kept Toby. So I think that's probably the weakness of the team. Overall, the roster is really talented. I just think consistency is their biggest issue, and I don't really think that's changed going into this year. I think that's still going to be an issue for this team. They could finish 10th in the standings, but make another deep playoff run if the meta catches right. So they're a very weird team, so it's going to kind of be a lot of wait and see. Do you have any final thoughts on the roster, Connor, before we move into the final team for this episode?
Honestly, I would have to say their consistency is pretty questionable. Win, lose, win, lose. I mean, you never know what's going to happen with that team.
Yeah, and I don't think they really did anything to address that and fix it very much in the offseason. As far as a tier, I would like to put this team in A, if you kind of agree with that. I think that despite consistency issues, I think this team will be better than last year.
I would have to agree with A as well. Doing better. But like we both just said, the inconsistency. So we could think they're going to be A at first, and then suddenly they're in C tier, and they're horrible, you know. You never know what's going to really happen, so I guess we could put them in A and see how they perform later on through the season.
Right. Yeah, I don't think their floor is that low. I think there's just so much talent and leadership on this team. I think that they're one of those teams that have a really high ceiling, but their floor is like middle of the pack at worst. So I think no matter what, this team's going to be okay. The last team we're going to look at today is the Shanghai Dragons. I've been really excited to talk about this team. I think they're going to be probably, I think they're going to be a top 3 team no matter what. I think most people assume they're going to be a top 3 team. I've seen some people doing hot takes. They think that they're going to be better than the Shock and all that. I'm not going to claim that, but they're definitely top 3. So we'll dive into the tank line first. Void and Fate has the potential to be arguably the best tank line in the league. I think Fate is actually going to fit in even better than Fearless did with this team because he has, experience with Coach Moon before this already. I think that'll be really good. And he was just really solid on the Florida Mayhem last year. I thought he brought a lot of leadership and stability to that team. And I think he can bring that here. Not that Fearless wasn't stable or a leader. I think he was both of those things. But I think Fate is just kind of even a level above that. I think he's going to fit into this roster really good, honestly. And then having Void by your side as an off-tank. Void is incredibly good. His Sigma is top 3 in the league. I don't think anybody should really argue that. His Diva, Zarya, Hog are all amazing. I mean, this guy can do it all. In my opinion, he's right up there with he's right below Choi Yobin and Fury. And then looking at the DPS lineup, they have Fleta, the reigning MVP, super flexible player. He can play anything from Echo, Widow to Pharah and Genji. Lip also kind of really established himself as a top DPS last year. He's going to bring that Sombra to the team. Hanzo, Ashe, Reaper, a lot of flexibility as well. And then I'm really excited about Erster. I can't actually say how excited I am about Erster. He hasn't actually got played in the league that much because he's had visa issues like crazy, like every season it seems like. But when he came into the league, what was it, maybe 2 years ago now? We were talking about him as not only rookie of the year, but an MVP candidate. People thought about him that highly. That not only as a rookie would he be maybe the best rookie, but he could be MVP of the whole league. And now that he's actually going to be stable on a roster, I don't think he's had visa issues. I think we could actually see what he can do. Hopefully he's not washed up or something now, but I'm really excited about that. If Erster comes out and is as good as we thought he was going to be 2 years ago, that puts this team on a whole nother level. And he's also, like Lip and Fleta, super flexible. I mean, they just have so much covered. There's not a meta they don't have covered with this team that I can see. And then, there's DM. I forgot about DM. He was kind of weird. They were really bad at the sniper meta last year. That was their struggle, which was weird because DM was coming out and just popping heads. He's just clicking heads all over the place, and they still struggled. I don't know why. That's something they are going to have to figure out, what the issue was there. But I trust Coach Moon. I think he's one of the best coaches in the league. And again, super flexible player. I know I've said that 4 times now, but that's the case with this team is there's just so much flexibility and talent on this roster. I would probably go as far as to say this DPS lineup is top 5 in the league with, top 2 or 3 potential. I mean, they are really good. And then you look at their support line, and it is an absolute cracked support line. Izayaki, Lee Jae-gong, and Molly. I mean, that is a phenomenal back line. You cannot ask for more than that. They could be the best support line in the league. Izayaki is a great flex support and play anything from Baptiste to Moira, Ana, Zen. Obviously, Zen won't really be played, I don't think, but he's very good at all of those. Lee Jae-gong, everybody knows him for his Lucio boops. That dude is, people kind of say he kind of feeds a little bit, and I think you take that for what he provides, because, yeah, he might go in and feed, or he might, get a 3K boop, so you just never know, and it's kind of awesome, and he's really good at the game. He's probably one of my top 3 supports to actually watch. And then I think Molly provides a lot of stability. I really like that pickup coming over from Chengdu. And I'm really excited to see what he can do on a more stable roster. Because obviously that Chengdu roster was all over the place. They were the funky, wacky team that everybody liked because they never played the meta. They were just Among Ball, must wreck people, and just played the weirdest compositions compared to everybody else. So I'm really excited to see what he can bring to a more stable team. I think he's going to be very good, and overall, just that back line is phenomenal. And so earlier we put the Washington Justice in the S tier. Obviously, there's another team we all know is going to go there. We'll talk about in the next episode tomorrow. But we're also going to put the Shanghai Dragons in S tier. There's not really much more that needs said about this roster. Every part of it's amazing. The only thing, if I was going to really nitpick, is they only have 2 tanks, but I don't think they need any more tanks. I think Void and Fate will be just fine. In fact, I think they'll be fantastic, and I don't really see an issue there. That's just if you want to be really nitpicky. So S tier is the place we're going to put them. Before we, wrap things up, Connor, just last, thoughts about this roster overall.
Honestly, I think they have a really great roster, as you've been talking about the great DPS, the great tanks, and even though you said they have only 2 tanks, I mean, I know you're not a fan of that, the whole 2 people in each role should be 3. I mean, but given their tanks that they have, I think that's going to be perfectly fine. They have a great lineup and great players, great history. I don't think this team's going to be a problem at all, and I think they belong in S tier, honestly.
Oh yeah, they're gonna pound. Yeah, no, that's one of the only tank lines I agree where just 2 is fine. Like they're just those 2 are so good. Fate and Void together, that's gonna be phenomenal. I think this team probably has the best chances of taking down the Shock. So yeah, that's kind of a look at this overall roster. Tomorrow, we're going to do the other 8 we have not gone over yet. Again, we wanted an individual team preview for every team, but due to scheduling conflicts, we weren't kind of able to get started soon enough to do that. So, unfortunately, kind of had to speed through, some of these teams a little bit, but I think still, give a pretty good idea of where these teams stand. And this Dragons team will definitely be one of the best teams in the league this year. Thank you guys for watching. Make sure to tune in to the next episode. We're going to cover the last 8 teams we haven't talked about already, including the San Francisco Shock. And like usual, don't forget to subscribe, turn on the bell icon for notifications, and please leave us a comment. We'd love to hear feedback on how we're doing, how we can improve, and we will see you guys for the last team preview for the 2021 season.